All right, welcome everybody. For those of you who are joining us, welcome. We're so glad that you can be with us on finally a sunny day. I hope it's sunny where you are. So if you're joining us for the first time, what we like to do is have you introduce yourself in the chat box. So if you hold your mouse towards the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there's a menu you can open up. Open up the chat box and tell us who you are, where you're from. It's always fun to see where everybody's coming from. You can make sure to just click on all panelists and participants, so that way everybody can see who's here. I'm also going to be putting in the chat box, we do have the ability for closed captioning today if you need that service. I just put the link in the chat box, but just kind of keep introducing yourselves. We're just going to give it a minute or two to let everybody come on in today. Give us time to get our wits about us. I see Oren's with us from Burlington and Luke's here from New Jersey. We also have Haley from Maine. That's fantastic. Who else is with us today? Introduce yourself. It's always so fun to see who's joined us. And while you all are introducing yourselves, I'm going to take the opportunity to go over our Zoom protocols today. These are just a set of rules that we like to have for our virtual gatherings. You all are muted today. Unfortunately, you don't have the ability to unmute yourself, but there's two ways for you to share your thoughts and your questions today. The first is the chat box. In the chat box, that's where you're gonna, if our presenters ask you to think about something or want your feedback, you're gonna use the chat box for that. We ask that you use the chat box to stay on topic. So that's really just to be focused on what's happening in our cafe today. Any questions you have for our presenters today are going to go in the Q&A box. So they'll monitor that and we'll answer all the questions before the cafe ends today. If someone likes the question that you wrote, you guys can, you're going to see that there's a thumbs up. If you click on that thumbs up, that just means that you also like that question and it moves that question up the rankings so that we know how to prioritize the questions. We ask that you be courteous and respectful. So don't create any distractions. We can't see you. You can only see us, but by what we find can be distracting, I'm going to go back and talk about the chat box. Using the chat box off topic can really be distracting for other participants. So please just stay on topic. We do monitor it. If it ends up being distracting for people, I do take the privilege away. So we really want to make sure you have the ability to, ask questions, make comments, but again, on topic. So we ask that you stay engaged, participate fully, because today's topic is really interesting, I think, because actually my background is in the environment and natural resources. So I'm very excited to introduce our presenters today. They're going to be talking about give a hoot, don't pollute, understanding why people value and protect the environment. We have with us today Diana Hackenberg and Tatiana Gladkey. Both are PhD students in natural resources at the University of Vermont Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources. They study social and cultural aspects of environmental management, examining questions like how do people interact with nature? How does nature impact our health? What motivates us to protect the environment? Their work is focused right here in Vermont. Diana works with the community surrounding St. Albans Bay, and Tatiana works with the Intervale Center in Burlington. So I would like for all of us to welcome them here today, and I'm going to turn it over to the both of you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I'm Diana.
I'm Tatiana. I'm all good to go with sharing my screen.
Okay.
Okay. And since I've never done this before, I have to now give all those weird permissions. Yeah.
Hopefully we'll get going in just a minute. Thanks for joining us. It's exciting to see that there are people from multiple states here in the Northeast. I was kind of just expecting people from Vermont, so
I'm gonna have to quit so I can share my screen and rejoin. So maybe you can, in the meantime, you can ask the question of.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Well, this will be in our PowerPoint slide too, but we don't really need a slide to do it. So the first thing we wanted to do actually was an activity. So we wanted everyone to think of your favorite place in nature. Think about why is it special to you and what you like best about that place. So think about it and maybe write in the chat box if you feel comfortable sharing what your favorite place is and why it's special to you or what you like about that place in nature. So I'll give you a couple minutes to think about that and to write in the chat box. I'm going to take some notes because we'll come back to this later in the presentation too. Nature places. I guess there's some nature in Disneyland.
I'm getting an error that the screen sharing is disabled. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can't.
You can't do it?
It says it's disabled by the host. Maybe, Lauren, there's a thing you can click and approve?
There is nothing I can do on my end. Diana, do you have the PowerPoint?
I do. Let me see if I can share it.
And if not, email it to me real fast.
It's a
And
link. You can send it in chat or email, right?
you can email it to me. It looks like you have some great places coming in. Luke's favorite place is Lake
Awesome.
George, New York, because there's so many great things to do outdoors. You never get bored. And we have, I can't see whose name it is. I have a giant, and when I say giant, I mean a giant boulder in my backyard, and it's kind of comfy to sit on, and the Grand Canyon is really pretty. Yes, Haley, love that. And then Andrew, I like the Incarnation Center. There's so much wildlife.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I don't know what the Incarnation Center. Does anybody else have a favorite place? I had put that I love Glacier National Park, and really any national park, but Glacier National Park in particular was and is my favorite.
Let's see.
All right, I believe I just got the PowerPoint, so let me try to pull it up on my screen.
I was gonna say, it also looks like I am sharing.
Yes,
my
you're
screen.
sharing it. You have it. So you should do it. There you go. That's fantastic.
Okay. Let me see. Oh, that's an activity.
So I'm gonna just interrupt for 1 second. We did get in the Q&A something that really should be in the chat box. So I just want to remind you guys, comments and things like when you're answering a question that the presenter is asked, put that in the chat box. Leave the question in the Q&A box solely for questions that you want to ask our presenters, okay? Great, thank you.
Let's see, I'm trying to share just the PowerPoint so I can see my notes too, because you can see my whole screen right now, right?
You won't be able to see your notes.
Oh.
If you only have a single screen, you cannot see your notes.
Would you be able to share it then, Lauren?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So you on screen.
Then we'll get rolling.
You guys, we apologize. Little technical difficulty today. So let me share.
Okay.
And then let's see.
But this is good. It's giving everyone a good chance to think about their favorite nature place.
Okay, so you guys can see it now?
Yep.
All
Yes.
right. So you'll just have to
Excellent.
tell me when to advance for you guys.
Can do. Okay. If you think of other places that bring you joy in nature that you really like, feel free to keep sharing them. But just want to thank everyone for sharing these reasons why you like these places in nature, why you care about them. Another way to say that is that you value or you get benefit from nature. And these benefits are one of the main things that we're going to be talking about today, because they connect to both why we need healthy ecosystems, why we need nature, and how we can get people to act to protect ecosystems. So Lauren, if you want to move ahead, that was kind of our opening slide, and then the next slide should show the activity that we just did.
Oh. Do you see the question?
I just see the main slide. I wonder if you hit share.
Or present.
Or present.
Present.
Yes, present.
I did hit present. Okay, hang on. I'm gonna unshare. I was in present mode.
Okay. How about now? I'm sharing.
Yeah,
Present.
there you go.
Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
We got it.
Okay, so we did our activity.
Phew.
So the next thing is the agenda. So these are the forming questions or topic areas we hope to cover today in our short time. How people benefit from nature, how these benefits relate to people's behavior, how can we better understand these benefits through research, and how you can pursue a career that connects to these ideas if it's something you're interested in. So there are a lot of different ways we can think about or conceptualize the relationships between people and nature. Many scientists and policymakers, including myself and Tatiana, we've taken to thinking about these relationships through the ecosystem services framework. So as you've probably learned in school, an ecosystem is a community of living organisms and non-living components of their environment that interact together and function as a system. And so we can think about ecosystem services as the benefits people obtain from these ecosystems. And these benefits contribute to people's overall physical and mental well-being. So they're really important. So these services, these ecosystem services, can be categorized into 4 broad groups. So the first one, which I don't actually have pictured on this slide, are the supporting services. And they're named so because they support all the other services. This includes really basic ecosystem functions, like ecosystems form soil and they cycle nutrients. So the next group, which I have shown here, are the provisioning services. And this describes the material or energy outputs from ecosystems. And this includes things like food, wood, medicine, fibers, and energy. So my next question for you is, what provisioning services do the ecosystems near you, or maybe the ecosystems you thought about in your favorite place, what provisioning services might they provide? And if you have some ideas, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll give you 30 seconds to think about it. No one gets any provisioning services from their local ecosystems.
It could be a garden. A garden is an ecosystem.
Yep. Yeah. So if you get food from a garden, yeah. So Andrew is saying stone, minerals, air. Yeah, I guess air is a physical thing that we get from the environment.
Clean air is more specifically, yeah.
Yeah, clean air. I was thinking about stones and minerals earlier because I was looking at a picture of someone had collected rocks and painted them and left them around their neighborhood.
Oh,
And
wow.
the physical rock is a service from the environment. Some other examples, like right now in Vermont, people are collecting fiddlehead ferns and ramps from forests because they're really tasty. If you've ever gone mushroom hunting, if you fish, if you hunt, all of those products, those like material goods, those are provisioning services. Or maybe you heat your home with wood. That wood is a service from the environment. So that's one of the categories. So the next category, if you want to move forward, Tatiana, it should show it, yeah, are the regulating services. So these describe how ecosystems act as regulators, like how nature filters our water, or related to air, how it can clean the air of pollutants. This also includes decomposition, includes pollination services, climate regulation, and disease control. So similar, I'm wondering, can you think of any specific regulating services that the ecosystems around you might provide? And if you can think of some, you feel free to put them in the chat.
There's a Q&A.
Does anyone keep bees?
And Diana, while they're writing, there's a question that might help. What is the difference between provisioning and regulating?
Yeah, so you can think of the provisioning as like an output, like something is being created through the functioning of the ecosystem, where the regulating services, it's more like the means, the way that output is created. So when you're thinking about the water, it's the processes in the ecosystem that help filter the water. So it goes through the streams and certain pollutants fall out. That would be cleaning the water. I don't know, Tatiana, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I will just use the examples that you have here. So for example, pollination is not something you can really touch and grab and use, but the pollination provides, like, bees regulate the service, the ecosystem by pollinating it, so then the ecosystem, so a garden, could provide you provisioning food, something more tangible, something that you can have and hold and sell on the market if you like to buy on the market. So I think like provisioning, they're also this tangible things that we use, versus regulating is the things that nature does to regulate how ecosystems work and produce all those other benefits that we get.
Yeah, awesome. And I see in the chat that Andrew wrote photosynthesis. So I think that is kind of right in there. It's the idea that the plants are taking some materials in like sunlight and water and nutrients, and through the process of photosynthesis, they're able to take it and turn it into a material good that we might also benefit from, like food. Okay, keep asking questions. That was great to try to explain that a little bit more clearly. We have one fourth category, one final category left. So Tatiana, if you move through. So the last, but certainly not the least category of ecosystem services are the cultural ecosystem services, which relate to a lot of the things you were talking about when talking about your favorite places. So cultural ecosystem services are one of the primary things that Tatiana and I study. And you can see there some of the examples, and we're going to go through these a little bit more, would be aesthetics or nature's beauty, the idea that you can go and recreate and you like to just spend time in nature, that nature provides a platform for us to be social and engage with one another, even though that's a little bit harder right now. and that nature provides a place for us to learn and grow and be inspired. So if you want to go to the next slide, Tatiana.
Yep.
So cultural ecosystem services are defined as the non-material benefits people obtain from ecosystems. So non-material basically means not physical. So relating to the mind or the spirit or the intellect. And another way to describe this is that they're intangible, kind of like the regulating services, and that they can't be touched. They can only be perceived by people. So unlike other services, they're usually directly experienced. And different people perceive cultural ecosystem services differently, depending on their backgrounds, their experiences, their cultures, even their age. So you as high schoolers might experience cultural ecosystem services differently than someone who was in their 50s or 60s. And another way that they might vary is even by gender. So these benefits, they're really specific to people and who people are, their identities, and they can often be very localized and they can change over time.
Hey,
And the
Diana.
last thing, yes.
There is a question that I think is going to be helpful.
Okay.
What does the word aesthetic mean?
Yeah. So aesthetics means basically how things look, how things appear to us. So nature, and that is beautiful, and that we like to look at it. That is just like when you see a sunset, you think, that's so beautiful. That's basically aesthetics. Even smell can be aesthetically pleasing, and it can be included in that as well. So when you think of how nature smells after a rainstorm, I would include that in aesthetics. Awesome, good question. So last thing I wanted to say about cultural ecosystem services on this slide is that they can be very interconnected with each other, as well as with other services. So one example is ice fishing. Do any of you ice fish? You can put in the chat if you do, but if not, that's okay too.
No.
No.
People think no.
Yes. So ice fishing, it provides food, which is a provisioning service, but it can also be a really important cultural tradition that's passed on from generation to generation. So I'm wondering if Evelyn, if she goes ice fishing with family, if she learned it maybe from a family member, or maybe it's something that you like to do with your friends or your neighbors. It can be like a very social activity. And that part of it, those benefits are are related to the cultural ecosystem services. So all these different features mean that cultural ecosystem services are really important, but they're often hard to understand and to study. And so oftentimes in research and in policy, they're forgotten or ignored. But this is changing, though, including with some of the research that we're doing here in Vermont, which leads to my next slide. Are there any other questions right now?
No, not at this time. At least
okay.
That haven't come in, but you guys, if you have any questions, remember, just put them in the Q&A box and we'll get them asked.
Yeah. So thinking about specific cultural ecosystem services, so I do my research in St. Albans Bay, which is part of northern Lake Champlain, and the communities I work with are on the Vermont side of the lake. So St. Albans Bay is about 40 minutes north of Burlington. And the Bay provides a lot of different cultural ecosystem services, but also the water quality is deteriorating. They have a lot of cyanobacteria blooms, which happen not just in St. Albans Bay or Lake Champlain, but in water bodies around New England and around the world. And when they happen, they're green, they're not aesthetically pleasing, they smell, and they can also be dangerous to people. So they impact how people can use or view the ecosystem. But in my research, one of the things that's really important on the next slide, one of the cultural ecosystem services related to the bay. Yes, are the aesthetics. It's that people find it to be really aesthetically pleasing. So the people of St. Albans Bay, they love the sunsets there. Whenever I talk to them, they always want to show me pictures that they took of the sunsets. And they just say it's one of their favorite parts of living or going to the bay. I think someone said maybe that glacier, they really love it. And I think one of the reasons a lot of people love it, it's so beautiful. Oh, the Grand Canyon is really pretty. Someone wrote that in the comments earlier. And so another really important cultural ecosystem service on the next slide is that many people in that area think of St. Albans Bay as important to their identity or their sense of who they are as a person. So they just can't imagine living somewhere else. And when someone asks them, you know, if someone asks them like, where do you live? They'll say, oh, I live near St. Albans Bay, because they feel like it's the important identifier to where they are, to who they are. So some of you might also think of the place where you live as part of your identity. A lot of Vermonters feel very strongly about being a Vermonter because it's connected with the Green Mountains and our beautiful natural areas in Vermont. So those are just two examples. There's a lot more cultural ecosystem services, but I'm going to turn it over to Tatiana to talk about some of her research.
Thank you. I have the chat open, but if you could also help me monitor.
Yes.
I appreciate that. Well, thank you, Diana. My work is a bit more local to where UVM is based, so Burlington. And specifically, I work with the Interval Center. I've seen that some of you are not from Vermont, but I'm just curious to know if you maybe have heard of the Interval Center or you have visited the Interval Center. Please let me know in the chat if you have been there. But, well, if you are in Vermont or you have a chance to go to Vermont, especially Burlington, I really encourage you to visit this place. It's a really unique study site. Of course, I'm also emotionally biased towards it because I work with them and they're really wonderful people there. But it started as a community farm. It's a really big agricultural land that they have a community farm. They also have a community garden. They have a large picnic area where they hold festivals and different events. In winter, they have a large area for skiing and snowshoeing. But also, and not many people know about it, as my research showed, they have a protected area close to the Winooski River, where they have one of the rarest, most special, and most typical forests for Vermont, silver maple floodplain forest. And that area is protected. So the interesting thing about the Interval Center is that it combines this agricultural area of active production, with the forested areas where nature is protected and no development is allowed and people can only use it passively. And in my work, I'm really interested, I'm collaborating with the Interval because they want to understand what kind of people visit their place. Why do they come? How do they use it? What are some of the benefits they get from the Interval, so that when they make some changes, maybe decide to, I don't know, make new trails or remove a trail, they can understand better what are the needs of people and preferences of people who come and use the Interval for different things, including, for example, education, learning about gardening and farming, recreating, skiing, or listening to music, or maybe just spending time with their family and friends. And one of the benefits of cultural ecosystem services that I'm most interested in my work is mental health. This is not a picture from Burlington or Interval Center, obviously, but I chose it because I think it's a good illustration of the mental health, contribution to mental health that nature has for us. At least I, after a long day of sitting behind the computer at home during the coronavirus and social distancing, I get a particular relief and the mental relaxation just going outside and looking at nature, looking at trees. And as a scientist, I'm interested in understanding, well, how does nature provide this mental health benefit? What are the mechanisms that result in us feeling better when we spend time in nature? What kind of nature? Does it matter how long you stay outdoors? Does it matter with what kind of nature you interact so that you feel better? And actually, Diana and I and two more colleagues are currently doing an online survey with Vermont residents because we want to understand how is nature contributing to mental health of people during the times of pandemic. It's been a really challenging time for all of us, and not only physical health has been affected of many people, but also mental health. And as we are restricted to stay at home, we no longer have the social interactions we used to. Nature, to many, has offered a place to just recuperate and feel a bit better. And so we want to learn and understand how is it happening, and see how we can make sure that in the future, when we make policy decisions, when the policymakers make decisions about environment, that they consider these benefits like mental health, like identity, like contribution to aesthetics and recreation when they make their decisions. Are there any questions, or should I move on? I'll move on. And this brings me to, sorry?
I don't see any questions, but Otis does live right next to the intervale.
Oh, perfect. Well, I wonder if Otis, oh, nice. Well, feel free to share in chat what you think about the intervale, or if you've been there or not. And that's just curious. So I encourage you, if you have a chance, go visit. It's a beautiful place. As I was talking about our interest as scientists in documenting these benefits, well, why do we do it? One reason we do it is because we want to understand the different ways that people interact with nature and how does nature benefits us. But also the scientists, we often have a social responsibility of making sure that our research goes beyond just publications and results, and have an application on policy making and decisions. And one of the challenges with CES is that one natural place can provide different benefits to people, and these benefits could be often conflicting. So for example, here I chose these two pictures to illustrate that some people might really appreciate the forest as a place of protection and conservation, and maybe their value would be to have the forest untouched and just protected for other species, versus other people might value other ways of interacting with the forest, like active recreation through picking mushrooms and berries and plants. And so our role as a scientist is to document these benefits and also think about, well, how do we reconcile all those different preferences? How do we make sure that people benefit from nature in an equal way, and that we're not privileging benefits and preferences of one group, one community over the other? And how do we communicate this information to policymakers so that they can ensure that when they make decisions about managing natural resources, they consider that all of the diversity of benefits from nature that people receive and that people care about. There. And I will.
Does anyone have any questions about what Tatiana was just saying about policy?
And thank you for catching me on my jargon. Yeah, CES is Cultural Ecosystem Services. We just use it so often that I forgot to clarify that. Thanks.
Well, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. But this next slide is really related to what Tatiana was saying. So another reason that we're really interested in studying these cultural ecosystem services is we're also really interested in what causes people to act in a way that protects the environment. So one of the questions we ask is how do these benefits relate to people's behavior? And so scientists, researchers used to think of behavior as something really simple. They had this really simple knowledge that basically our knowledge, what we know, influences our attitudes, so how we feel about nature, which would then drive our pro-environmental behavior. So things like recycling or turning off the water when you brush your teeth. So in this model, if you want to change someone's behavior, all you have to do is give them more information, and that's it. But as many of you are probably thinking, it's just not that simple. There are many other things that influence whether or not we're going to engage in behaviors that are pro-environmental, that help the environment, that protect nature. So I'm wondering, what else do you think influences people's behaviors toward the environment? So if you have some ideas, you can throw them in the chat. What else might go into a model of what causes people to behave? Any ideas? Personal experience with a place, yeah.
Really important, yeah. We choose to, some people would care more about a place that they have a personal relationship with versus a place maybe they've never seen and never got to experience.
Any other ideas? Okay, we'll move on to the next slide, but if you have ideas, keep throwing them out. And this next slide might actually help you, it might generate some more thoughts. So now scientists think that this really complicated model, and these are just some of the things that they think are driving people's behaviors. So incentives, whether they get something for helping the environment, could be money, or it could be more berries if they like to pick berries. Also things like people's personality, or if they have certain emotions toward the environment. So cultural ecosystem services are related to this because they're potential influential motivators of things like our values, and they're highly related to what Lauren said with personal experience of a place. And so they potentially motivate how we make decisions, how we behave. It's shown that local communities often get involved in environmental issues when they impact how they can use nature, if they're able to still do their recreational activities, if it's an issue that changes the aesthetics of their favorite place in nature. So if they're gonna propose to build a giant skyscraper at the Grand Canyon, that would highly affect the aesthetics of maybe the Grand Canyon, and that might drive people to protest or to get involved. But we know there's some kind of relationship, but we don't really have a clear idea as to how these cultural ecosystem services link to behavior, or how we can use these important services, how we can draw on that idea to build more support for conservation. So again, that's what we're doing with our research. So are there any questions about this slide? Yes. Definitely. So here in Vermont, they wanted to do some wind power on top of mountains, and that was one of people's main arguments, that we live in this beautiful place and the wind power would impact the cultural ecosystem services. So not just the beauty, but might even impact people's sense of identity with the mountains. There are other people, though, that would argue that they actually love the aesthetics of wind towers or windmills because it reminds them that we're generating renewable energy and actually working toward decreasing the carbon that leads to climate change. So kind of like what Tatiana was saying, some people might really value the environment one way, and some people value it the other way. Lauren thinks they're pretty. So if we go to the next slide. So what I was saying is that, so we want to study the benefits, we want to understand them better. We also want to understand how they relate to behavior, and we want to understand how we can tie this all into policy, what Tatiana was talking about. So a lot of you are probably pretty familiar with quantitative methods. These are what you think about when you think of scientists in a lab doing experiments and holding things constant. You can do experiments with people to test whether or not certain things will get them to behave in a certain way. Like if you give them a certain incentive, like money. You can also do non-experimental designs like Tatiana was talking about. We have a survey that's asking people questions about how much time they're now spending doing different activities with the different restrictions we have in place with coronavirus. But often we're doing more on the social science side, on the qualitative methods and mixed methods. So we're looking at more, not just numbers, but we're looking at what people say and think. Again, that kind of that mind versus like the physical, tangible. And we do this often through, in the qualitative methods there, it says ethnography. That's basically observation. We go and just observe people either in the natural spaces that they love or maybe at meetings. We do interviews with people and just ask them about their thoughts. We can also do case studies, which is looking at different environmental issues, maybe at the Intervale and at St. Almonds Bay and maybe another place, and see how they're similar and different. And then when you start to mix the two methods, the quantitative and qualitative, one way we do that is through mapping. So maybe if you were looking at like the Intervale, you would ask people where in the Intervale they spend their time and where they get different benefits. So that actually leads to the next slide. Tatiana's going to talk about one of her research methods that she's using. But are there any other questions before we do that?
Checking. I don't see anything.
Okay, all yours, Tatiana.
Okay. Well, one of the data collection I use are interviews. And interviews are not that different from just regular interviews you see on YouTube or TV when journalists interview people. And what we as scientists do, we talk to a group of interest, a community, in order to explore and understand more about a particular phenomenon of interest. So in my case, for example, I went to New York City, and since I'm Russian myself, it was easier for me to access this community of interest, specifically Russian-speaking immigrants who live in New York City and who pick mushrooms. So I just went and I found people who fit that criteria, and I talked to them. I had a list of questions that I was interested in asking, and I just found people who were interested in talking to me, who had time, and asked them those questions and wrote down what they responded, and then analyzed their responses in a structured qualitative way, which I won't get into, but basically you just look at what people say and try to identify what are the main themes, what are the main ideas that are coming through as people talk about things that matter to them.
Awesome. Any questions on Tatiana's interviews? I have a question that everyone should have an answer to. I'm wondering, what social media channel is your favorite? Do you like Instagram or Facebook or Snapchat?
Or maybe none.
Or maybe none. Do you guys not use social media? Facebook and Snapchat. Facebook, awesome. YouTube, okay. I have no idea what a Discord is. And Pinterest, yeah. So all of these different social media channels, researchers have used to look at Snapchat, Instagram, awesome, yeah, to look at cultural ecosystem services. Text, okay, maybe not Discord, maybe they haven't used that yet. But they can use social media. They can look at both what people are writing about nature when they go and visit nature, as well as they can look at the pictures, and they can look at what people are actually taking pictures of. So a lot of researchers use social media. Some use TV and YouTube. There are lots of different studies of like nature documentaries and how they talk about nature. What kinds of different services are they talking about that nature provides us? I, in particular, am really interested in how local newspapers have talked about St. Albans Bay. What do they say about it? What do they say are the important features or benefits that people get from the bay? And because they have this environmental issue that's been going on, these cyanobacteria blooms have been going on now for a really long time, unfortunately, 60 years. I can also look at the newspapers to say, okay, these are the benefits or these are the services that they're saying have changed because of the environmental issues. One of the big things are the aesthetics, how the bay looks. When there's the blooms, the bay is really pretty ugly. And it causes people a lot of stress and a lot of frustration. So that's what I'm using, is I'm using newspapers. A lot of stuff on writing, books, and music from me. Yeah, definitely. They often, when they're using social media or like newspapers, or say for instance like Instagram, they'll be looking for specific things. Like either they'll be looking for a specific hashtag, or if you have geotagged your post with like a specific, say you were at the Intervale Center and geotagged it, then they'll just look at all of those posts. So definitely researchers are using your social media data to do their work. We're hoping that using that is actually going to be able to not just like help us, not just for research, but to help manage these places, or to help understand how to get people to, again, engage in those behaviors that'll help conserve those areas. I think we lost Tatiana.
We did. For all of you who don't know this, Tatiana was coming to us from Puerto Rico. And so I'm guessing there was a Wi-Fi issue, or, you know, I know the power grid on the island can be iffy at times. So do you need the PowerPoint back up, or?
No, I don't really need the PowerPoint. I'd love to have Tatiana back.
Yeah, she might be able to get back in, but yeah, unfortunately, she is gone for right now. I want to open it up to all the participants to think about a question, but I'm going to launch a poll right now because we are nearing the end of our time. And just let us know if you see this poll. We just want to know. We always like to get feedback on the overall virtual cafe. And then there's a second question on whether or not you learned something by coming today. So if you can just answer the poll, both questions, and then think about some questions that you might have. You can put it in the Q&A box or just put it in the chat box. that would be great. So I appreciate those of you that are answering the questions, just making sure that you answer both questions. And I know, Diana, you do see the chat, right?
Yep.
Great.
Yeah. So I can talk a little bit about, can address some of that.
Oh, I think we have Tatiana back.
So one of the things Evelyn wrote is that she doesn't understand people who don't like nature, or who destroy it, because it seems really integral to how we're able to live. Like I mentioned earlier, nature is connected to our overall physical and mental health. But if you remember that slide with behaviors, unfortunately, it's just not as simple as you like something and so you treat it well. There's lots of other things going on, including what people even believe is the right way to treat nature. So there are some people that think that humans should be able to use nature, that it was put here for their use, and that it's resilient, that they can just use it and it'll bounce back. And then there are other people who view it more in a stewardship way, that humans are able to take care of the environment and that's their responsibility. And then you keep going more toward what we call ecocentric relationships, where the environment is centered or more important than people. And there are people that view it like humans and nature are the same thing. We're on the same level of importance. So it's not just that they don't like the environment, it's that they view their behaviors toward it in a different way. And not that that way is right or wrong, but it's just different. And then beyond that, there are just so many things that influence people's behavior. So whether or not they have access to certain resources, whether or not they have access to recycling. A lot of people, including even here in Vermont, have to pay extra for recycling. And if you don't have those kinds of resources, you can't engage easily in that behavior. Hi, Tatiana.
Oh, sorry, I'm back.
No, that's okay. Just trying to answer some of the questions in the chat.
Yeah, so in our final few minutes, are there any questions you want to ask Diana or Tatiana about their research, what they do for their school, why they chose this to study?
That is the one slide we didn't get to.
Oh.
Which is basically, there are a lot of different opportunities for people that are interested in these topics to study it in school. And there are a lot of different careers that you can pursue, including careers within the government, with nonprofits, with businesses. You could get just a bachelor's degree, or you can go on to graduate school like Tatiana and I. So yeah, whatever questions you have about kind of this field.
Yeah, so Emily asked, what do you do at school? And so these guys are in graduate school, so it means they've already gone through 4 years of college, and they decided to specialize in sort of this field of environment or natural resources. And I can speak a lot about what they're doing because I went to the exact same school that they went to and got the exact same degree that they're going to be getting. And there's proof that you can do so much with it, because part of my job is actually running environmental programs for teens. But what do you guys, like, what do you guys do at school besides your research?
Tatiana, do you want to answer that first?
Yeah, at this stage in my career, there's nothing else besides research, just because it takes so much time. I also just finished co-teaching. I was teaching some undergraduate students about research methods and ways to research environmental problems. And also we just do a lot of volunteer activities and outreach and community service. Oh, it's pretty diverse, but mostly research.
Yeah.
Mostly just working on research.
So for you guys to know, when you go to graduate school, usually your first year you're taking classes. Maybe your second year you still might have a class or two, but at some point you're really just focusing on what your master's thesis, your big master's project is going to be. And that's the stage that these guys are in right now, where they're just focusing on one big project that will ultimately, it's like their big capstone project, put it into some high school language, where once they're done that, they present their work, they have to defend their work, and then hopefully they put on their cap and gown and get an advanced degree. So are there any more questions for these guys, or otherwise we can, I do see there's a question.
From
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you have school online right now, like the K through 12. If you were taking classes right now, you'd be online classes, right?
Well, I was teaching online. So
Yeah.
mid-semester, we shifted, instead of teaching in person in lecture hall, we were teaching students online. But as Lauren mentioned, we're not taking classes anymore. So it didn't really affect us in that regard.
Yeah.
One other thing we're doing online is, so Tatiana and I were studying similar but different things. We have different projects, and we both work with the same advisor. So the same professor, she leads our lab, and we have other students in our lab that are also doing similar research, but again, different projects. And so throughout the semester, we met with our fellow lab students and our advisor. We met with her online, and we had weekly meetings, because that's one cool thing about doing a master's or a PhD, is that it's very collaborative. So you work with other students to learn from them and get ideas, as well as both Tatiana and I, we work with community partners a lot to understand what questions they have that can be answered through research, as well as how our research can help them, again, better protect different natural areas.
That's great. Thank you guys both for not only sharing the work that you're doing, but also getting these guys to understand a little bit about what graduate school could look like or does look like. So for those of you who are thinking about college after you're done high school, you can also think about going to graduate school, or which is either a master's, or then you could go further than that and get a PhD. So these are all things you can begin thinking about even today, just especially if there's something that you're really interested in. And my advice to those of you still on with us is, talk to as many people as possible to just really get a sense of, what this is all like. So thank you both for sharing. If you guys can thank our guests today, we'll thank you for hanging out with us for the last hour. Everybody, it's always a fun time. And we hope that for those of you who joined us today, hopefully you'll join us next week. We have some guests who are going to be their mental health professionals, and they're going to be sharing what it's like in the world of mental health as a practitioner. So should be interesting. So thank you both for coming today, and everybody have a good rest of your day and rest of your week. The sun is shining, so it's always good. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.